Hello, everybody, and welcome to Dharma Talk. I'm Matthew Sokolov, as you may know, and I want to start off just by acknowledging that we've been off for a couple months now, maybe almost 3 months, a few months with things, and we're back. The short story is we had a lot going on. We had a complicated pregnancy with a successful childbirth, and we've been taking care of a newborn baby. We were in the process of buying a house, and we also both got very sick with Zika. So just kind of a crazy couple of months, but we're settling back down and finding some stability as much as possible. So remember, you can visit oneminddharma.com/talk to subscribe via email or YouTube or find the links. We've also started back up our online classes, which have been going wonderfully. And we now have 2 classes, a Monday night class at 4 p.m. Pacific, our normal meditation and discussion. And then on Thursday nights at 5:30 p.m. Pacific time, we're giving new life to our Deep Dharma class, which is similar to these talks, and the topics will actually follow each other. But like these talks, we go a little bit more deeply into the Buddha's teachings. There's more silence during the meditation period, and it's a great way to kind of investigate these teachings of the Buddha in a group with the community. You can learn all about our classes. They're donation-based. All are welcome to join, regardless of experience or finances. It's class.oneminddharma.com. And the last thing I want to say, and I don't have them with me, is I have 2 books out now, and they're both doing wonderfully, and I've been receiving a lot of really powerful emails and text messages from people, Facebook and Instagram messages. One is, the older one is about a little over a year old now, Practicing Mindfulness, and it just contains 75 different ways to encourage mindfulness in your life, from formal meditation to meditating with kind of daily activities and beginning to investigate our relationship with ourselves. And then the new one, a Mindfulness for Beginners journal, is just what it sounds like, a journal for, could be useful for investigating mindfulness and bringing mindfulness to your life in a way that's really approachable and really pragmatic and honest to yourself. You can search my name, Matthew Sokolov, wherever books are sold. You can visit oneminddharma.com/book or oneminddharma.com/journal to learn more about them. And I should have copies in my hands, and I don't. But anyways, check those out. I always introduce the title of the talk or the topic of the talk like you didn't already see the title when you clicked the video or the episode on your podcast player. But I wanted to talk a little bit about a foundational teaching that we've never really covered, and that's the middle way or the middle path. And this is something that I think is often misconstrued or used in ways that wasn't exactly how the Buddha taught it. And I also think it's something that's foundational to the Dharma and to our practice. So I want to start with just a little bit of backstory about how canonically the middle way or middle path came to be. As many of you know, the Buddha lived a life of relative luxury and wealth and comfort in his early life. As I often mention, he wasn't actually a prince. Scholars don't believe that. There weren't princes at that time and place that the Buddha lived. But he did live a rather lavish lifestyle and luxurious. And when the Buddha went off to live the life of an ascetic, of a wandering monk, he kind of went the opposite path. So instead of living with too much or more than enough food, wealth, sex, whatever it was, he went to a life of kind of deprivation's a harsh word, but that really was the practice of the ascetics at the time. The idea was that if we withhold basic nutrition and drink, then we could kind of de-stimulate the physical body and get in touch with the soul or the deeper being. And the Buddha lived like this for quite some time. It actually wasn't until he was walking and met a young girl walking, Sujata, the daughter of a local householder, and she thought he was some sort of ghost or spirit. This kind of realization that he was emaciated from starving himself and depriving himself made him kind of seek out the middle path or middle way. And in the suttas, that's where the Buddha decides that the way to enlightenment may not be through the extremes of overindulgence or austerity. Traditionally, the first teaching the Buddha gave at Deer Park was the first turning of the wheel of the Dharma, and the Buddha talks pretty extensively about the middle way. He names it as an underlying principle of the Eightfold Path. And actually, the Eightfold Path is the way to practice the middle way or middle path. I think it's important to note for accuracy's sake that many scholars who analyze the teachings don't believe the first turning of the wheel of the Dharma to actually be the first teaching. There's actually subtle references to previous teachings in it. But canonically, it's held as the first teaching, and perhaps for its importance, its kind of explicit outlining of the path. I'll read you a quote from the suttas. There are two extremes that are not to be indulged in by one who has gone forth. Which two? That which is devoted to sensual pleasure with reference to sensual objects, base, vulgar, common, ignoble, unprofitable, and that which is devoted to self-affliction, painful, ignoble, unprofitable. Avoiding both of these extremes, the middle way realized by the Tathagata, producing vision, producing knowledge, leads to calm, to direct knowledge, to self-awakening, to unbinding. And what is the middle way realized by the Tathagata? That producing vision, producing knowledge leads to calm, to direct knowledge, to self-awakening, to unbinding? Precisely this Noble Eightfold Path. Wise view, wise resolve, wise speech, wise action, wise livelihood, wise effort, wise mindfulness, and wise concentration. This is the middle way realized by the Tathagata, that producing vision, producing knowledge leads to calm, to direct knowledge, to self-awakening, to unbinding. So this clearly is a teaching on the middle way or middle path. And then the Buddha goes on, he refers to himself as Tathagata, a word which if you read the suttas you may be familiar with, but it was a name for himself at the time. But he goes on to say that this middle way is realized through the Noble Eightfold Path. Pretty explicit, not a ton of room for interpretation there. The way that we hear the middle path or middle way is about kind of finding a balance or a happy medium. You may have heard the story of the lute player. The lute still is a stringed instrument. And this teaching that if the player has his strings too tight, it won't sound right, and too loose, they also won't sound right. And thus the lute player must keep his or her strings not too tight or not too loose. And you may hear this in Dharma circles, not too tight, not too loose. Jack Kornfield says, when we discover the middle path, we neither remove ourselves from the world nor get lost in it. It's this balance or equanimity, not reactive, but not indifferent. Not overexerting, but not being lazy in our practice. Canonically, in the suttas, the middle path is taught in a couple places specifically. There, in reference to the Noble Eightfold Path. It's also taught and interrelated with the teaching on dependent origination. It's kind of seen as an explanation of the middle way, that there's no eternal self and things are changing and moving and evolving. It's also taught with in a related way with kind of eternalism and nihilism. The Dharma being between these teachings of nothing existing and some things permanently existing. This is especially related to, both of these are related to the characteristic of not self in Buddhism. It's also taught in relation to the two truths, conventional truth and absolute truth. Conventional truth is that I'm sitting here speaking into a microphone and camera. You're sitting there listening. Maybe you're doing something else. The ultimate truth is that I'm just a collection of atoms and neurons firing electricity, and it's making my vocal cords move in a way that creates some sound that we can both interpret as words and gain understanding from. And both of these things are true, but the middle way is that we have to find some balance between the two, not holding one above the other, or one is right and one is wrong. It's also important to note that there's a middle way with each kind of factor of the Noble Eightfold Path. That wise concentration or wise mindfulness isn't just concentrating and overexerting ourselves. There needs to be some kindness and some gentleness. In the Majjhima-Nikaya 101, it says, "How is exertion fruitful, bhikkhus? How is striving fruitful? Here, bhikkhus, a bhikkhu is not overwhelmed by suffering and does not overwhelm himself with suffering, and he does not give up the pleasure that accords with Dhamma, yet he is not infatuated with that pleasure. He knows thus, when I strive with determination, this particular source of suffering fades away in me because of that determined striving. And when I look on with equanimity, this particular source of suffering fades away in me while I develop equanimity. He strives with determination in regard to help that particular source of suffering which fades away in him because of that determined striving. And he develops equanimity in regard to that particular source of suffering which fades away in him while he is developing equanimity. When he strives with determination, such and such a source of suffering fades away in him because of that determined striving. Thus that suffering is exhausted. When he looks on with equanimity, such and such a source of suffering fades away in him while he develops equanimity. Thus that suffering is exhausted in him." The Buddha here teaching that there is value in both kind of striving and backing off with equanimity. That some suffering can be relieved when we put a little bit more effort forth, a little bit more energy or action moving forward behind it, while some suffering may be relieved if we kind of put the energy forth to step back and to develop equanimity. And we'll come back to this idea in daily life, but this is kind of one of the core pieces as it relates to every way in which the middle way is cultivated in the Dharma. George Haas, a teacher that I used to sit with at Against the Stream, used to often say that we need to know when to bear down and when to back off. There are times in our meditation practice where we need to dive right in, or in our daily life where we need to dive right in and put effort forth. And there are also times we need to back off. And this is the same teaching, the striving versus equanimity. Bear down or back off. Maybe something's coming up in our meditation practice, the mind wandering, or maybe even harmful or unskillful thoughts. There may be a time that we need to bear down and really just return to the breath. Not engage with the thoughts and just come back over and over rather sternly. And there are times we need to, or we can benefit from letting the mind wander and observing the thoughts with some compassion or metta. I think one of the greatest examples is with concentration practice, where so often I've experienced, and many of my students have shared, that in order to concentrate, a lot of people will turn towards using an unskillful amount of effort. That true concentration, wise concentration as the Buddha taught, definitely requires effort, but it doesn't require straining. There should be some ease and gentleness to it. We need to practice the middle way. We need to know when to put forth more effort to bring the mind back, when we're being kind of lazy or complacent. And we also need to know that maybe the mind's wandering right now because I'm stressing or straining. Maybe I need to back off, take a few deep breaths, try to reset the nervous system. The same with mindfulness. A lot of people, including myself, fall into the habit of straining too hard to be mindful of everything. And again, there needs to be some effort put forth. But if we're straining or stressing and not noticing that, we're not practicing the middle way. We can kind of return back to that middle ground. Just observing the wandering mind, observing the thoughts, responding with some metta instead of reacting. So those are kind of pieces on meditation, but we can also look at the middle way as it relates to ethics, the kind of our daily actions in the Noble Eightfold Path. One of the most useful pieces of advice I've heard, and it was useful to me and several other people sitting on the retreat, was a teacher, I believe Joanna Harper, now Hardy, said that if you're the type of person on a meditation retreat, and this was maybe the first day or opening talk, if you're the type of person on a meditation retreat who attends every single sit, every single talk, every single moving meditation, you may benefit from taking one break during the meditation retreat and going on a hike or going on a walk or taking a nap or being gentle with yourself in some way. And if you're the type of person who has a hard time getting to things and you're often missing things or sleeping through things, maybe you could put forth some effort to really follow the schedule. And it's a great example of the bear down, back off. That for one person in a given moment, the answer may be to kind of bear down and work a little harder and put more effort forth to follow the schedule. While for the other person, they may need to put the effort forth to kind of relax and take care of themselves. But either way, they're coming into the middle together. And Elizabeth, my wife, and I are complete opposites in that sense. I'm the kind of more relaxed one who doesn't go to everything, and she is the one who is on time and goes to everything. And it's been a really interesting practice, like in our marriage, in our intimate relationship, in our daily life, to really investigate what the middle way is for both of us together as well. But we need to know when to take a break and when to work harder. When we're stressed during the day, when's the right point to work through it and kind of bear down and get it done? And when's the right time to take a break and maybe go for 5 minutes of walking meditation, or maybe go sit somewhere in silence, or maybe go listen to a song we love? The answer isn't always to put more effort forth or always to be relaxed, but we need to practice this middle ground, this middle way. We think of things so often in a dichotomy, kind of, and the middle way is this teaching that there is a huge gray area for us to investigate. We can look at it with almost anything in our lives as far as ethics go. We can look at it with drug and alcohol use, what we're eating or consuming, drinking. We can look at it with our meditation practice. We can look at it with keeping things clean or getting exercise, right? We can stress about these things or be really lax about them. I've gone through periods where I was using Insight Timer and I had 200 days in a row on Insight Timer logged, and if I didn't meditate by the time night was coming, I would get really stressed, and I would meditate out of fear of losing my streak. And it got me to meditate, but I don't think that that's the healthiest or most skillful way or reason to meditate. I think I've shared before that a few years ago I was struggling with being tired all the time and my weight, and just really overall unhealthy in my habits and lack of exercise. And I ended up losing about 65 pounds at the time. And it was a real interesting dance of not stressing and straining, but also not being too lax with myself. To kind of be healthy and get the exercise and encourage this energy in my body was a real investigation, a deep investigation of the middle way, of how I could do it in a way that's sustainable and doesn't exhaust me, of not beating myself up, but also not allowing myself to get away with absolutely everything. I think that the way that the middle way or middle path comes up for us in general, and this is a huge generalization, I understand, is in what I mentioned before, that kind of dichotomous thinking where we can either go for it and go get it, or we can kind of relax and do nothing. Whatever it may be in our lives. And to understand that there is a whole gray area in the middle, that we see things as so black and white or right or wrong, or however we see it in the moment. So the middle way or middle path, like many of the Buddha's teachings, is not a teaching that we should, or we're instructed to rather, just hear and be like, oh, that's great, love it, I agree with that. But we really should investigate what it means to cultivate it in our lives. Looking at the Noble Eightfold Path, which is what we're going to move toward talking about in this podcast here in the coming weeks. But looking at the Eightfold Path is a great way to begin investigating the middle way. These practices of wise view and wise livelihood and wise action and wise mindfulness can help us gain an understanding of what it means to be there in that kind of balanced area where we're not overexerting and we're not kind of letting ourselves slide, not falling into the overindulgence or the austerity as the Buddha had discovered. And I think pragmatically one of the ways that I really investigate or look at the middle way in my life is this kind of value of kindness versus effort or insight. That often in my mind, when I'm faced with some decision or I'm stressed or whatever it is, the options come up as some sort of, I could put a lot of effort forth and really truck through it, or I could be kind to myself and sit back and relax for a moment. And that's just one kind of framework that my mind looks at it through. And neither are right, but at times I really think we're called to be kind and gentle with ourselves. And other times we need to be more disciplined, not in an unkind way, but in a more kind of exerted way. I think that's all the thoughts I want to share today on the middle path. And we're going to talk about the Noble Eightfold Path moving forward. And we'll bring it back to the middle way and middle path and continue this discussion of what it means to kind of find this balance. What it means to know when to bear down and when to back off. What it means to rest in the gray area. What it means to mix insight and the heart practices. So that's all I have. I think when I started this podcast, I wanted the talks to be about 15 minutes. That being said, we're 25 minutes in, and this is going to be a shorter episode. But as always, if you have any questions, you can email me at Matthew, 2 T's, at oneminddharma.com. You can visit us at oneminddharma.com. That's our home. There are our classes are on there, the books. I do donation-based meditation coaching or Dharma coaching. And remember to check out the books, check out the online groups. And if you have a topic you want covered or any questions, please reach out to me. And I look forward to talking with you all next week.